Hello and welcome to Sick Notes. My name's Ed Hope. I'm a junior doctor in the UK, and over on Netflix in the US, one of our favourite shows, Cells at Work, has recently started airing on there. I know I've got a few episodes to finish off from the first season, but in the meantime, you guys recommended I check this out, the manga of Cells at Work Black. I'm not going to go into a sort of a full depth review. I'm just going to be talking about the first chapter of this volume, which is actually available for free to view online, and I'll leave a link down below. So why don't you go check that out, read it for a few minutes, and then come over to the video and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Obviously, this is going to contain spoilers, so you have been warned. So why is it called Cells at Work Black? Well, it's kind of a darker version of Cells at Work. So the body is not as healthy as the previous Cells at Work, even though there seem to be loads of things going wrong in the last one. So the body in this one drinks alcohol, smokes, I think is quite overweight. But the second reason why it's a bit darker is some of the themes are a little bit darker as well, more adult, should I say. So they have things like sexually transmitted infections. There's something on, I think, alcohol abuse, and also erectile dysfunction crops up as well. Anyway, so let me just talk about the things that I enjoyed about the first chapter. First up, just a fun little fan theory actually. So on the first page we see the new red blood cell, so he's a sort of young chap rather than the young girl that we saw in the previous Cells at Work, and he's going through the aortic valve, so the main outflow valve from the heart, and it looks a little bit different, this valve, than we previously saw in the animes. These actually look more like the vein valves that we've seen in the anime rather than heart valves. So the anime before, it looked very much like a sort of sanctuary, the heart valves. This looks, to me, a lot more futuristic, a little bit more mechanical. I thought, could this possibly be a valve replacement? The most common cause of valve disease is aortic stenosis. So that aortic valve I mentioned, it becomes sticky and stiff and unable to open as well. And in its extreme cases, that would need to be replaced. So we can either replace that with a tissue valve, or we can replace it with a mechanical valve, like a metal valve. So maybe that's what that's representing. As I say, I'm not totally convinced, but something that just popped into my head. Next up, the way they depict stress hormones here, this cracked me up because they depict them as these kind of shouty managers, like bossing the red blood cells along, which is kind of reminds me what happens at the hospital when things start going badly. That's not true. So the stress hormones they mention are adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. So adrenaline is the name we tend to use in the UK and presumably in Japan. But in the US and other parts of the world, it's referred to as epinephrine, exactly the same thing. So when you have this stress response, you know, that fight or flight instinct, adrenaline gets released into the bloodstream, you know, like these shouty managers get released into the bloodstream, and that does a few things. So it kind of gets you ready for action. So it increases your heart rate, increases your blood pressure, diverts blood to the muscles ready for action, and does other things as well, like opens up your airway. So that's why we use adrenaline or epinephrine, so EpiPens, when people have anaphylactic reactions. It opens up the airway, so life-saving in that circumstance. So it's a lovely touch that these shouty stress hormone managers are shown in the bloodstream, because that's where they'll be released and go around the body and have their effects. They'll also have effects within the blood vessels, kind of like we see here, although we see them having effects on the red blood cells. Obviously, they don't work on the red blood cells. They work on the blood vessels. So they constrict the blood vessels to the gut, because we won't be needing to do any digestion if we're ready for action. That's why we get that funny feeling of butterflies in our stomach when we get nervous. And it dilates the blood vessels to the muscles, so gets your muscles ready for action. And this is all great stuff in a time of danger or kind of physical stress, but as it says in the manga here, screaming bosses incident after incident, day after day. So this type of thing happening over and over again is going to raise your blood pressure, put more kind of stress on the blood vessels, and in the long term this is not very good for you. Living with this kind of anxiety, artificially raising your heart rate and blood pressure, so over many years this can increase your risk of things like heart attacks and strokes. So next up we see a rise of carbon monoxide, depicted as a kind of gas leak in the bloodstream, giving the red blood cells coughing and wheezing symptoms similar to that of acute smoke inhalation, although carbon monoxide on its own wouldn't cause these symptoms. It's a colorless and odorless gas that doesn't cause irritation to the respiratory tract. I think what could have been more accurate but nowhere near as fun is if the red blood cells just could not resist the carbon monoxide, like it was kind of a drug that they just had to grab hold of, because kind of that's how it works in reality. So carbon monoxide has a 200 times greater affinity for hemoglobin than oxygen does. And that's why it's so bad for you, because it will bind to the hemoglobin and stop the oxygen binding to the hemoglobin. So essentially stop oxygen going to your tissues. So it might be fun to show the red blood cells as these kind of junkies just not getting enough of the carbon monoxide. So in this chapter, the carbon monoxide is attributed to smoking a cigarette. So one cigarette would increase your carbon monoxide levels in your blood, but nowhere near enough to cause you any breathing problems. Carbon monoxide poisoning tends to come about through smoke inhalation. So house fires and things like that, or if there's been like a gas leak or carbon monoxide type leak within a closed environment. And very often people won't realize it's carbon monoxide. They'll just have funny vague symptoms like headaches, feeling sick, fast heart rate, just feeling generally unwell. And then when they come into hospital, we'll figure out that it's carbon monoxide poisoning. By far my favourite part of this chapter was the depiction of cholesterol build-up within the arteries, making it more difficult for the red blood cell to travel down them. When we have excess cholesterol, our body needs to store it somewhere, and as we see here, we have the LDL dumping cholesterol in the walls of the arteries. And this cholesterol forms fatty streaks and eventually larger plaques, which narrows the arteries, and as we see here, makes it more difficult for the blood to flow through it. This process is called atherosclerosis. This happens to some degree in all of us. There's even evidence that we start having these kind of fatty streaks deposited even before birth. So it's a fairly kind of normal process. But if it gets really extreme and actually narrows the blood flow and starves our tissue of oxygen, we start getting problems. So if that happens in the heart, we can get symptoms like angina, or if it happens in the legs, we can get what's called peripheral vascular disease. And even worse than that, these plaques can be quite fragile and therefore can actually rupture. And if they rupture, they can cause the blood to clot in that area, what we call a thrombus. And if that thrombus then occludes the blood vessel, then any tissues that are supplied by that blood vessel can end up dying. So in the heart, that would be called a myocardial infarction, so a heart attack. Or if that happens in the brain or any blood vessel going to the brain, then we'd call that an ischemic stroke. And there is a great line in here. Greater amounts of oxidizing cholesterol get released into the bloodstream because of the oxidizing free radicals that come from elevated stress levels. That is amazing attention to detail. I'm not sure it's even entirely necessary for the story, but that was really great medical information within that sentence. Really good revision for me. So what are oxidizing free radicals? Well, oxygen, although vital to your survival, can also be found in the body as a free radical. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that it has an unbalance of electrons. So it's an unstable molecule, and when it comes into contact with other molecules, can make them unstable and so damage them. So it either donates some electrons or steals some electrons and makes them unbalanced. It's kind of like that really annoying person that is really unhappy and makes everyone around them unstable. That's a kind of human free radical. It's funny because we often call this process oxidative stress. So your cells are under stress from these oxygen free radicals around them. And as pointed out in Cells at Work, psychological stress, so physical and life stresses, can cause an increase in these free radicals. If you get stressed, your cells get stressed. And what Cells at Work is getting at is actually the oxidized LDL. So the LDL exposed to these free radicals in the blood, that's the biggest problem in atherosclerosis, because this attracts immune cells, attracts inflammation, and causes more damage to the blood vessels. And just like the first episode of regular Cells at Work, we have a Streptococcus pneumonia infection. Nice little callback to that first episode. And we see our white blood cell in this series, and it's a kind of overly sexualized character. Maybe that's just me. I mean, she's equally effective at killing the bacteria though, but I mean, look at this scene. She's basically got Streptococcus juice on her breasts. So there you have it, guys, the first episode of Dr. Hope's manga review. I really enjoyed it, so if you want to know some more of my thoughts as I go through this, then let me know. Give this video a like and a comment, and I'll see what I can do. And I know you've been so patient with the Cells at Work anime reactions. We're very close to finishing the season. I can't wait to finish it. So thanks for your patience. They will be coming soon. And as always, guys, thanks for all the support on the channel, all the likes, the comments, the shares, all the new subscribers as well. Thank you so much. They make me keep wanting to do more videos for you. So I hope you guys are well, and I'll see you soon.